In this video, we're going to take a look at how to create sensors. Now, it's worth noting that when you're creating sensors inside of the command database, there's going to be different types of sensors that are going to have different kind of perks depending on what exactly you're trying to do. In our particular case, we're just simply going to design a simple fire control radar. So I'm going to go over to sensors, and it's going to bring up this menu that looks like this. Now, the sensor technique is going to be the exact same to everything we've done. We're basically going to make a copy of it and then make direct adjustments to it. So in this case, I'm going to switch over to Datasheet View, and we're going to go and find the good old-fashioned radar that we've all familiar with on the F-16. So I'm going to quickly do a quick little type. We'll do long title. We'll go ahead and do generic satellite camera. We'll do our filtering option. Like I said, it's important to have that button up at the top. We'll go ahead and say an AN-APG. Press enter, and we have all sorts of versions of the AN-APG here. So let's take a look here. We'll take the AN-APG, we'll do the Model 9 here, and we'll use that as our basis. So just like always, we're simply going to go up to add-ins, we're going to do command, and copy entry, which is going to save it up here. Once we've done that, I'll just make a mental note, 6264. I'll go ahead and shut off our thing, and then go back to the regular form view. So this is where you're going to see all the key instrumentation details for the particular radar system. First up in the top left is going to give us all the different capabilities. In this case, air, surface, range, altitude, speed, and heading. We have other capabilities. For example, we can do some kind of land search if we needed to, but not for this particular case. We can do periscope search if we wanted to improve its quality just a little bit. We could even do things such as doing over the horizon particular waves using different types. We can even do a space search with this particular one should we need to. We also have the ability to define things such as ground mapping and navigation only. So in this particular case, we're certainly not going to pick submarine search. It's not really fair that we have a radar that can penetrate the waves. Perhaps that such thing does exist, but not for us. But what I will do is I'll activate periscope search. Again, this is going to be a super duper upgraded version of the AN-APG here. So we're going to say this is a version 9 ultimate upgrade version UUV. So now what we're going to do is we're going to say comments. This is a simple fire control radar. We're going to say it's complete. Type is going to be a radar. Keep in mind, if you change the type, it's going to have a big impact on which one of these options down below are available for us. In this case, we're going to leave it as a radar. But keep in mind, there are multiple different types of radar depending on what you're using. The next item we want to take a look is generation. Generation is critical because the newer radar generations, it might not necessarily mean that it detects more, but it becomes progressively more difficult to jam as well as detect. In this case, we'll go ahead and say that it is early 2020. So it's a very, very, very high quality, ultra modern digital processor and everything. We now have the ability to select what any kind of role. In this case, so we have a medium range. Calling something short, medium, or long simply adjusts what the ESM response is. In this case, I'm going to leave it at medium range. We have mask. Now, this is a pretty slick trick. We can actually design it so our radar pretends to be a different type of radar, and that is what the mask refers to, which again is a pretty neat little trick if we choose to do so. Over here on the right, we have the ability to define the minimum and maximum altitudes. In this case, it's going to be in feet as well as meters. It's going to go all the way to 0 and all the way up. And we also have the ability to do things such as define what our range resolution is, height resolution, our angle resolution, scan interval. Now keep in mind, some of these values cannot be directly adjusted because they're going to be calculated based on whatever statistics you apply down here. In our case, our scan interval, we're going to assume this is probably going to be an AESA radar. So we'll improve the scan interval to 1 second to make it even quicker. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to come down here and we can pick any sort of different frequencies we need. In this case, we're going to stick to the I band, which is the old X band. Illumination frequencies, in the event that we have a special weapon that needs to do any sort of illumination, we can actually come down here as well. In this case, we can come down here and say it also illuminates on the I band should we need to for this particular weapon, for example. Maybe we have a new semi-active radar homing missile that we want to be able to use this radar for. You would need to include the illumination frequency during that part. It's worth noting now that no matter what frequency you set here, you have the ability to manually dial in exactly what frequency you wish to work with. Keep in mind this is in hertz, so this is a 9.7 gigahertz up to 9.9 gigahertz. Keep in mind different radars have different frequency ranges that can be used to make it easier or harder to jam. Over on the right side, we have the ability to go ahead and decide how many contacts we can search, as well as how many we can engage at a single time. In this particular case, since we're not illuminating anything, we don't have to worry about any engagement. That's simply going to be a limitation of the rest of the aircraft this is connected to. Below this, under radar stats, we have the ability to define things such as beam width, vertical beam width, the noise level, the processing gain, the peak power, the pulse width, blind time, as well as the PRF ratio. So in this case, we're going to assume that it's a slightly more modern radar, so we'll go ahead and shrink down our beam width significantly, which is going to have a major impact on some of the resolution capabilities of this particular radar that we have here. We're also going to assume, since this is a slightly more modern radar, that its noise level is significantly less. We're also going to assume that it has a really sophisticated radar processing on board, which is going to make it a little bit more effective. effective. So we're going to go ahead and reduce the radar processing loss to about -4 decibels. Next, we have our ability to define our peak power. Since this is a more modern version of this radar, we're actually going to reduce the peak power slightly, which will have an impact on our ability to detect targets. Next, we have our pulse width. We're going to leave that alone. And keep in mind the pulse width in blind time is going to be linked to your PRF. In this case, we'll leave our PRF alone. Keep in mind it's possible to create an ambiguity in your design if you create a PRF that doesn't match up with the maximum instrumented range. In this case, our maximum instrument range is 60 nautical miles. If we wanted to raise this up to 80, we have to keep that in mind and have a significant reduction in some of the other statistics on it. Otherwise, we could run into problems where we have ambiguous ranges and things like that. Next, what we're going to take a look at is we're going to take a look at this little chart here, which gives us an idea of how effective our current radar is. In this case, you'll notice that we're detecting a target that is 0.0025 square meters. It can be detected at 12 nautical miles. Likewise, we have the ability to go ahead and detect a target that is 50 square meters, a total of 146 nautical miles. Notice this TO instrument. This is the theoretical instrument range. This, again, is a function of our PRF. In this case, you'll notice that our 80 nautical miles is actually very, very close to our theoretical instrument range. Now, if we took our PRF and reduced it to, say, 950, you'll notice you'll have a significant increase in the instrumented range. Again, this is a complete function of the design of the radar that you are doing. It has nothing to do with anything that's hard-coded inside the program. To the right of this, we have the ability to identify any different types of items that we may have as far as very, very large craft goes. Like we can see, we can detect a destroyer at 374 nautical miles. We can detect a single periscope at about 10 nautical miles. Keep in mind, our periscope search capability is now listed over here, meaning we do have the ability to actually detect periscopes with our new super ultra fancy version of the AN/APG 68. Now, the other thing we can do here is we can actually define minimum contact signatures. This is actually very, very powerful because we can basically use this as a way to say there's a target that even though we might have the capability to, perhaps there's too much noise or we don't have a sensitive enough detector to actually be able to pick up anything along those lines. And this is a very, very powerful way to adjust that as well. Coming down here, we have the ability to define any sort of arcs for this particular radar. In this particular case, it's pretty much going to be the complete forward nose, both for the purposes of search, as well as whatever they have for their maximum arcs. Keep in mind, some radars will have a wider ability to illuminate than they will have to search, which would be represented by something that would look like this. Simply saying when it's looking, it has this cone. When it's also tracking, it's going to have this cone. Keep in mind, whatever you have here for your arc has to agree with whatever you have on the given aircraft. It's possible to have less arc. It's not possible to have more arc. The other thing you can do too is you can actually come in here and pick exactly how the arc comment has been written. And again, you can adjust that directly. Down here, we have the ability to create groups of sensors. For example, if we had a system that was both a EOTS or an IRIS system linked to this, we could actually add in another sensor, in which case, instead of the UUV, this would be one part of that sensor. And we'll take a look at a sensor group in a minute. On the far right corner, we have the ability to dial in any sensor codes. In this case, we have the ability to do IFF. We can get a moving target indication. And we also notice that we're a pulse Doppler radar with full look-down, shoot-down capability. So in this case, we're going to get a little bit more clever here. We're going to assume that it's going to be using some NCTR. We're also going to go ahead and upgrade it so it has the ability to do, let's see here, basic capability for a periscope search. We're also going to go ahead and give it some capability to do some track while scan. And you know what, while we're at it, we might as well make it as well as an ASA radar here. Now keep in mind, some of these different categories may contradict other items that are on here. The good news is when you run your data validation is it will throw any errors in this, so you'll know exactly which one of these items does not make sense. Now that our radar has been finished, we can now go ahead and take this and start adding it to our units. For example, if we want to go back to our F5 that we had way in the beginning, we can now take this radar off of it and we can now apply that new radar that we just created directly into it if we wanted to do it. Keep in mind, in the real world, you would not be able to fit this very easily. But again, you'd have our new fancy version that would be listed way up at the top. There it is right there, and bam, just like that. Next thing you know, we'd have to go ahead and adjust our search arcs as well as our arcs max. And now we have a very sophisticated radar mounted inside of the F5. All of the sensor techniques that you're going to be using are basically going to be the exact same. The only difference is they're going to have different ones of these little chats. So for example, if I go back up to the data, let's go ahead and take a look at, we'll take a TV camera, for example. I'll switch it over here. And you can see that all these have been shut off, but the only thing we see under visual stats is how much zoom you get if you're looking around and how much zoom you get if you're trying to identify something, classify it. In this particular case, you'd probably use this as a generic search, and you'd use this to be able to zoom very far in to see the fine details to be able to classify the unit that you have. Keep in mind, all visual sensors have similar sensor codes that you have down here. And keep in mind, anything with sort of these devices, you're going to have to keep in mind that they're visual light, they're going to be blocked by things like different clouds as well as terrain. Other options you can take a look is taking a look at sensor groups themselves, which are a little bit different. We'll go ahead and take a look and to see if we can find one. Here we go right here. I'll go ahead and open this one up real quickly. And now in a sensor group, the sensor itself does nothing. However, it is a collection of other sensors that are all integrated into a single package, meaning if any damage takes place to the L370, all of these different units will be disabled separately. Keep in mind, each one of these separate sensors is its own sensor as well, and can be edited and can even have its own groups of sensors. Now, where things get a little tiny bit tricky is if you have some sort of fire control director system. When you have that, you just need to make sure that whatever you design here is also going to be linked to whatever particular unit is the purpose of actually launching any weapons. For example, if I grab myself a ship real quick, we'll go get ourselves something pretty straightforward. Go down to filter. Again, make sure you have that filter button. It's the best thing ever. We'll get a Tycho. I'll take the Princeton just as an example. And we'll go ahead and take a look at our different mounts. In this case, if you take a look at our sensor groups, you'll notice that there's actually several collections of sensors, such as this group 2010. Now, if I were to double click on this one, you'll notice it's made up of these two smaller items on board. Now, to complicate matters, several of these different weapon systems can actually be guided by this sensor group. If we were to take a look at this particular one, you'll notice that this one has the ability to have its own sensors on the mount, as well as have several different directors on board. In this particular case, the whole mount together is one collection of sensors. Now, if we wanted to, for example, take a look at my illuminator right here, which is an ABM mod. Let's go ahead and take a look at something that will have that capability. We'll take the VLS real fast. Open this up. You'll notice that it has all mount records and everything along those lines built directly into it. In this particular case, all these weapons could be guided by a completely separate system. So if I were to grab this one, for example, you have this one. If we were to open up the individual weapon itself, you'll notice it has the ability to be illuminated by any of these items. So again, sensors are self-referencing, and they're going to be constantly connected to all the different items. It's just a matter of making sure that they're always available on anything that you're doing with these pieces. Another thing to watch out for with sensors is if you're working with anything that involves sonar, you're going to run into a situation where all the information that you're going to be needing is going to be relative down here with the sonar stats. Keep in mind, non-active sonar, you don't have to worry about dialing any values for it. Now, if you're working with any sort of OECM, we'll take a quick look at that real fast. With ESM, we need ECM. Here we are right here. Let's go ahead and take a look. You'll notice our stats now refer to our decibels, or how strong it is. It's going to be its peak power, its bandwidth, how many targets it can block, its POK reduction in the event that it's attacked. And you'll also notice that these frequencies are critical. If the ESM or ECM does not have sensitivity to these frequencies, it will not be able to jam that particular wavelength.